Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us for our press conference. We are here today to announce the release of Driving While Black, a report on racial profiling in Metro Nashville Police Department's traffic stops. This report was a collaborative project carried out by a team of more than 60 community members under the facilitation of Gideon's Army, a grassroots army for children. The mission of Gideon's Army is to act collectively, boldly, and strategically as a unified force for all children. We eliminate the root causes of the prison pipeline, save our children from death and incarceration, and guide them on a secure path to success. We'll begin this press conference with Gideon's Army leaders, Tanisha Gilliard and Evan Bunch, who will deliver some opening remarks. Tanisha will open by describing this project and how it fits within both a local and national context. Evan will give a brief overview of findings and summarize the report. Next, we will hear from one of our community elders, K.I., Vietnam veteran, oral historian, and civil rights activist, who was one of our interviewees for the report, as he tells his own story about driving while black in Nashville. We will end the press conference by outlining community demands and detailing organization next steps. Now I'll hand the conference over to Gideon's Army leader, Tanisha Gilliard, to explain the project's relevance within both a local and national context.
Thank you, Jessica. So one of the most widespread conversations that's being had both nationally and locally is on the topic of policing and police conduct. In Black and brown communities, there is a growing distrust in the people who are supposed to serve and protect, sparked by events such as the murders of Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, and Philando Castile, just to name a few. In an attempt to start a dialogue around the issues of racial inequity in Nashville, Mayor Megan Barry held two forums this past summer with elected officials and community members and leaders. Some of the major concerns that were brought up were the mistrust between the community and Metro Nashville Police Department and the overpouring of resources into discriminatory policing and scarce investment into communities of color themselves, echoing the same sentiments that are shared throughout the country at large. These concerns are not something that have gone unexpressed before. However, these forums still included an overwhelming presence of armed police officers, further contributing to many of the attendees' discomfort. As though Megan Barry and other elected officials didn't listen to the concerns of the community during these dialogues, Metro Council unanimously approved $1 million for further militarization of MNPD officers just a few weeks later. The lack of transparency and accountability undergirds the widespread distrust of the institution of policing in this country. On the topic of police brutality and race relations, MNPD Police Chief Steve Anderson is often referred to as a hero, leading a police department which is said to be a model department for the nation. While Nashville may not have seen the same events that led to the uprisings in Ferguson, Baltimore, Baton Rouge, and Dallas, MNPD exhibits the same, if not worse, systemic policing practices as other police departments around the nation. Therefore, Gideon's Army, along with a team of local community leaders and organizers, worked together to compile a report investigating the conduct of MNPD during traffic stops, mainly between 2011 and 2015. Civil rights attorney Kyle Mothershed requested and received the vehicle data form database from MNPD, and members of our team performed a thorough analysis of these stops. Gideon's Army leader Evan Bunch will now give you all an overview of the 12 core findings that resulted from our qualitative and quantitative research.
Thank you, Tanisha. As a precursor to the report we are releasing today, Gideon's Army conducted a series of community listening sessions called Family Suppers. At these gatherings, residents in predominantly Black and low-income neighborhoods fellowshipped and participated in healing circles. In these circles, some of our city's most marginalized residents shared narratives around community safety, youth violence and well-being, restorative justice, and the policing practices of the Metro Nashville Police Department. These suppers gave insight into how communities interact with and perceive the MNPD, which gave rise to critical questions community members have about policing in their community. In light of these questions, Gideon's Army started working on a police and criminal justice accountability project tasked with multiple goals, including community education and training, exploring alternatives to policing, and building power to create new forms of restorative justice and police oversight in Nashville. The report we are releasing today is a preliminary expression of these projects. The primary sources of our report are, number one, data on MNPD traffic stops obtained under the Tennessee Open Records Act, and number two, the self-narrated experiences of more than 20 black drivers who have been subjected to these traffic stops. In summary, our report shows that driving while black constitutes a unique set of risks, vulnerabilities, and dangers at the hands of the MNPD that white drivers do not experience in the same way. Upon reviewing MNPD's traffic stop database, our report makes the following findings. Between 2011 and 2015, Metro conducted 7.7 times more traffic stops annually than the U.S. national average. Between 2011 and 2015, MNPD made more stops of black people than there were black people 16 years old and over living in Davidson County. Between 2011 and 2015, MNPD consistently and unnecessarily stopped and searched black drivers in predominantly black and low-income communities at rates substantially higher than they did white drivers in predominantly middle to upper income communities. We also found that MNPD consent searches are excessively invasive and fail to yield incriminating evidence 88.4% of the time. We found that evidence of unlawful activity is found during searches of white drivers more often than in searches of black and Hispanic drivers. We found that nearly 80% of all Metro traffic stops in 2015 resulted in a warning, and in traffic stops including a search of the vehicle or driver, between 1/3 and half resulted in a warning. This means that hundreds of thousands of drivers are being stopped and searched unnecessarily every year. We also found that since 2012, Operation Safer Streets has resulted in more than 58,000 vehicle stops and 11,000 arrests, the vast majority of which were concentrated in communities of color. More than 90% of all of Operation Safer Streets arrests were for misdemeanors, often for possession of small amounts of marijuana or driving without a license. And more than 80% of stops yielded no evidence that warranted arrest. Our interviews with black drivers in Nashville found that Metro police officers regularly intimidate, harass, and unfairly exert their authority over black drivers. That aggressive tactics by officers result in traumatizing experiences of fear for one's safety and the safety of one's family and friends. And that black drivers experience anger at being treated unjustly and disrespectfully, frustration derived from being profiled, and the feeling that police do not serve and protect black people in the way they do white people. To summarize, our report shows that MNPD's traffic stop practices impose a severe discriminatory impact on the predominantly black and low-income communities that Metro's traffic stop regime disproportionately targets. MNPD's internal reports justify these disparities based on an alleged correlation between where stops are made and the number of crime reports in that area. However, our findings show that traffic enforcement targets and impacts entire communities, not just people who commit crimes. And that regardless of the area, black people are searched at much higher rates than white people. For these reasons, Racial disparities in policing are unlikely to be caused by individual officers' behaviors alone, but by institutional norms and policies that justify targeting predominantly black and low-income communities. MNPD is overwhelmingly unsuccessful and disparately impactful over-policing of predominantly black and low-income communities raises serious concerns about the effectiveness, legitimacy, and constitutionality of MNPD's traffic stop and search regime. Nashville's unnecessarily high rate of total traffic stops does not reduce traffic accidents and injuries, and does not appear to make any significant impact on crime rates compared to other cities making fewer stops. As such, our report calls MNPD's policing strategies into question, both legally and ethically.
Good morning. I'm Chaos. I'm a writer, oral historian, activist, and poet. I'm 70 years old. I've lived in Nashville for over 50 years. In my time here, I played football at several institutions. I took part in the civil rights sit-in. I rode motorcycles for over 40 years and took part in the Vietnam War under combat conditions. I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but at my age, my greatest fear is a traffic stop. I've heard, I've seen, and I've known of them to result in people being injured, unfairly jailed, or even killed. In the past 5 years in North Nashville, where I live, I've been stopped more than a few times each year. A while back, I stopped at Bud's Market on Buchanan Street and bought some ice cream in a small container. Upon exiting the store, I met some friends and sat in my car talking with them in the parking area while I ate my ice cream. An officer came and demanded that we clear the parking area. When I failed to leave quickly, he approached me and asked if I intended to leave at all. I informed him that I was eating, that I was legally parked in a designated area for customers, and that I was violating no law. He then demanded that the young lady whom I was talking with exit the car and show him ID. I stopped her. They were insinuating that she was a prostitute. He asked me what I was doing out there with her, to which I asked, was there a curfew on seniors? I knew this lady's whole family, her grandparents, her parents, her brothers and sisters, and her children. The irony is that a while after this, she was murdered. Her body was found in an overgrown yard of an abandoned house. She was 7 months pregnant. To date, her murder is still unsolved. These kinds of encounters with the Metro Nashville Police have left me distrustful of police. They harass, they disrespect, they intimidate, and in general act like an occupying army riding herd on a bunch of wayward citizens. Maya Angelou once said, one may forget what was done or what was said, but one will never forget how what was did or what was done made them feel. For most minority citizens that have encountered these kinds of stops, the feeling is usually bad.
Ashe, and thank you for sharing your story, Chaos. Unfortunately, there are several other stories like this from people who live in Metro Nashville. We'll begin the next half of our press conference with an outline of our demands. Next, we will hear from attorney Cal Mothershead. We will conclude our press conference with comments from Gideon's Army founder, Rashida Fatuga. Here to deliver our demands is Jelani, long-standing Gideon's Army member and leader, blogger, and member of the Nashville community.
Thank you, Jessica. Knowing that consent searches are invasive and fail to yield any kind of incriminating evidence over 80% of the time, Metro Police conducted 7.7 times more traffic stops annually than the U.S. national average. In addition, while police and the media would have the public think that the majority of people being found breaking the law during traffic stops are Black and Latino, and while Black and brown people are continually criminalized and demonized, white drivers are heavily the ones found participating in unlawful activity. Still, MNPD consistently and unnecessarily continues to stop and search Black drivers in predominantly Black and low-income communities at rates substantially higher than they do white drivers. We say no more. In 4 short years, MNPD has stopped more Black people than there were Black people over the age of 16-year-old living in Davidson County. We say no more. We refuse to be harassed and criminalized anymore. In order for this to stop, in order for Nashville to be the it city that it claims to be, things have to change. These are our demands. Number 1, employ restorative justice as a foundational principle. All police policy decisions must be made based on a deep commitment to the philosophy of restorative justice. We must invest in community-based preventative measures that are restorative, that nurture and honor the needs of victims, and that offer pre-arrest options of accountability within the community where harm is caused. Number 2, end broken windows, zero tolerance, and quality of life policing. Broken windows, zero tolerance, and quality of life policing are based on the theory that if police target low-level and petty offenses, there will be a reduction in more serious forms of crime. NYPD's famous and now unconstitutional stop and frisk approach to policing is a classic example. We know that this type of policing is ineffective, and we call for its end. Number 3, end Operation Safer Streets. Contrary to its name, Operation Safer Streets does not make communities safer. All racial groups are using drugs equally. Yet, Operation Safer Streets boldly targets poor communities and communities of color every single weekend, excessively stopping and searching innocent residents, while finding little to no incriminating evidence at all. The war on drugs, we now widely know, is a direct assault on the Black community based on the false pretense that poor Black people use drugs more heavily and more widely than any other racial group. We call on the Mayor's office and Metro Council to utilize this report as a resource and further investigate discriminatory impact and bring Operation Safer Streets to an end. Number 4, in the use of consent searches and pat-down searches during random traffic stops. MNPD has a track record of gross racial and ethnic disparities in its use of consent and pat-down searches. The vast majority of MNPD's consent and pat-down searches are against innocent civilians who have no contrabands or weapons. 95 out of 100 Latino drivers subjected to consent searches are innocent. 90 out of 100 Black drivers subjected to consent searches are innocent. 85 out of 100 white drivers subjected to consent searches are innocent. In the rare event that a pat-down or consent search does succeed, the contraband discovered is almost always marijuana or other drugs and is not a weapon. For these reasons, we demand the end of MNPD's use of consent and pat-down searches during random traffic stops, and we call upon the Metro Council to draft legislation instituting their eradication. Number 5, reject police militarization. In August 2014, during the Ferguson meeting hosted by Bishop Joseph Walker, Chief Anderson promised that Nashville would not invest in militarized equipment and that the equipment Metro had at the time was strictly for acts of terrorism. During this event, before hundreds of people, Chief Anderson acknowledged that departments should not rely on military equipment and tactics to police everyday problems, deal with peaceful protests, or to police Nashville residents in general. Yet, under Chief Anderson's leadership, Metro government recently invested over $1 million into militarized police equipment. Police should not become an occupying violent force in our city, and looking at the way Black people and communities are the main focus of police crime prevention and deterrent programs without merit or cause, we conclude that the use of militarized equipment will be used predominantly on Black people without merit or cause. We are not enemy combatants. We are civilians who MNPD has sworn to protect and serve. Metro Nashville government should reject the transfer of military equipment into our local police department. We are demanding that there be an end to militarization of the police. 6, divest from excessive policing and invest in our communities and children. As a unified voice, we call for a shift away from increased economic investment in policing and incarceration that builds bigger and stronger police forces and bigger jails and prisons. We call instead for a shift towards spending on resources that address the root causes of crime and harm. This includes an increase in funding for local organizations working on the front lines to confront youth violence and restorative justice, diversion programs in coordination with Metro courts, and enabling and funding the leadership of key community members who are more equipped than the police to help build safer communities. Number 7, institute a civilian oversight/review board, ensuring democratic community input into matters of police accountability. Number 8, institute racial impact tools to show the impact of laws, policies, and rules on communities of color. Number 9, radically overhaul MNPD's traffic stop training program. We demand an end to MNPD's officers training emphasis on the use of traffic stops as a pretext to gain entry into people's cars. Instead, train officers to focus on actual traffic enforcement and bona fide moving violations rather than using traffic stops as a pretext to conduct searches and make arrests. 10, equip all MNPD patrol cars and undercover cruisers with audio-visual recording devices. And 11, improve MNPD's transparency and accountability. Incident reports and other documentation related to suspected police brutality and racial profiling must be easily accessible to community members and researchers, because who is policing the police? These demands highlight the institutional transformation that must happen in order for Nashville to be a city truly rooted in justice. We demand justice. Thank you.
Kyle Mothershead, I'm a local civil rights attorney. We consider the findings that have been laid out here horrifying. They're also no surprise. It's what we expected to find when we looked at this data. We hope that alerting the public to this information, to the harm that this practice causes, will propel a political solution. We hope that the mayor and the city council will take it seriously. We hope that the police department will not obstruct. That said, we do expect the police department to obstruct. The police department reviews this same data every year. They make a report every year on these traffic stops. Every year, the police department finds a way to justify them and say it's okay. So we don't know that we can just hope and rely on a political solution to solve this problem, which is why last night, on behalf of Gideon's Army, I referred the report, our findings in this issue, to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and we will be asking for an investigation to corroborate our findings, verify them, and take enforcement action if appropriate.
Hello, my name is Rashida Fatuga, and I am the president and founder of Gideon's Army. Since the institutionalizing of centralized police forces in the North and formal patrols of enslaved Africans in the South, black people in America, regardless of community demographics, profession, level of education, or economic status, have been occupied under a police state. Black communities have been saying this for years. Our current Nashville government will have us believe that we are different. However, our report has shown that Nashville follows the same unconstitutional policing patterns that are being practiced across the country. The same destructive patterns cited in the Department of Justice report evaluating Ferguson. But When people affected by these racialized policies and practices express the pain of their experiences and cry out for change, Mayor Berry's responses are often steeped in white privilege and are dismissive at best. Chief Anderson, who is widely celebrated for providing water to peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters, is the same chief who continues to oppose having the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations perform independent investigations of police killings in Nashville. The same chief who refuses to end the targeting of Black, brown, and poor communities through Operation Safer Streets. The same chief that promised peaceful policing in front of hundreds of people to turn his back on us and invest $1 million in ballistic equipment for MNPD officers, with the mayor publicly citing the civilian shooting of Dallas as their rationalization. Instead of doing what it takes to shift racial power imbalances and create a city that is equitable for everyone, instead of seriously assessing the root cause of racial oppression in this city, the historic government use of eminent domain to destroy our communities, our homes, and our businesses, gentrification, the history of government refusal to invest in Black communities that they tear down, and the over-policing of Black and high-poverty communities. Instead of really assessing the impact of racial inequities in oppressed communities and eliminating programs, policies, and practices that feed these power imbalances, Chief Anderson and Mayor Berry have installed more surveillance cameras, increased police presence, refused to end programs that blatantly rip away at the fiber of the Black community, and then invested an entire $1 million to suppress us should tensions rise between us and the police. So what are we talking for? Why do we keep having these sessions and these conversations on race if you are going to continue to do whatever it is that you want to do? Are you listening, or is this just a show? To validate themselves, Mayor Berry and Chief Anderson have both been known to go to self-proclaimed Black leaders in the community, willing to be their yes men for statements to the press that negate everything the community itself is telling them. In our community, we are our own leaders. We speak for ourselves. And now that we have both quantitative and qualitative data that show everything we have been saying all along, what are you going to do now? The racialized outcomes have to exist. They have to be there. How could they not be? Why? Because racism is woven into the very structure of this country, not excluding the institution of policing. This is something we inherited, and it is up to us to create a new society for our children and for generations to come. But what I need for everyone to understand is the change cannot be measured by how nice the police in Nashville can be. Because a lot of them can be very nice, but this is not about the individual police, whether it be a good or a bad experience. It is also not about how many ice cream cones they pass out to kids in public housing. The system must be torn down. I will say it again, the system must be torn down. And it must be rebuilt in a way to deliver different outcomes, or our children will never be able to thrive in a city that is racially just and equitable. Do I believe it can be done? I do. I have hope in my city. I believe in the goodness of our humanity and the strength of movement as a collective. This is our time to do what is right and just. To decide to stand even though we are tired, to unify and build on a foundation that are both equitable and just to create a world where all children can thrive. So who is responsible for shaping the city to be all we dream it can be? We are.